Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And this is class 11 of your C3D certification course, Creating Executable Strategic Growth Project Plans. Executable is the key of what we're going to talk about today. And here we are in our course journey. We're getting into the execute portion of the class. So first of the execute classes in this module. And I'm joined by Ed Wonke. Ed, thank you for being here. And a man who needs no introduction, but thanks for helping, Ed.
You're welcome. Looking forward to it.
So Ed has more experience in his little finger than I have in my whole body. So we're really lucky to be talking about all aspects of executable plans. That's a critical consideration that we're going to talk through. So growth drive action cycle. We've talked about analyze. We've looked at design. Now we're in the execute portion of the curriculum. And never hurts to go back and look at the 3 dimensions of business growth. And remember, and when we're building a plan, we're building a plan that is aligned with our client's intent. And that can be as simple as making the business easier to run, or as complex as selling at maximized value to a third party through an M&A transaction. And here's what we're going to cover. In this class, we're going to cover the fact that delivering wins requires people doing the strategy, right? Executing the strategy. We'll talk about the importance of transparency. I've hit on this in so many classes coming up to now on collaborative planning, right? Collaboration, transparency. How do we turn the growth drive OKRs into a waterfall of sprints? We'll look at some simple tools. We'll wrap this into the Ridge Specialty Tooling case. And we're going to cover tempo as well. Tempo, so important. So doing strategy, right? Execution is a top concern for CEOs, with 6% of strategies failing due to poor implementation. And it's almost a running joke among advisors, consultants, that we work really hard on creating a plan and it goes up on the shelf and gathers dust. And I know you've seen that, Ed, throughout your career. Strategy execution is rated as the number one challenge by CEOs. It is. Go ahead, man. Fire away.
Biggest thing is they don't want to take it down once they've finished it, because they think they've now arrived because it's completed.
Yeah. And they talking about change is a heck of a lot easier than changing, right? So why is there an execution gap? What is the execution gap? We'll get into that right now. And the root causes are lack of communication and accountability, right? Transparency, and being collaboratively accountable to moving the business forward. So let's start with the communication breakdown. And this links directly to planning. If we don't involve, we must involve the senior leadership team in analysis. We must involve, and we've talked about that. We must involve them in planning, and we've talked about being heard and the importance of everyone being aligned around where the business is going, and accountable to helping get there, and accountable in a collaborative way. There's some great stats out there. 37% of employees understand, which means that 73% of employees don't, 63% of employees don't understand the organization's objectives. That is 2/3. Imagine if you were on the field playing football and 2/3 of the team didn't understand that we were running the ball in that direction. It's going to be a problem. And that's not just an analogy. That is what we are talking about. Only 1 in 7 employees can name a key business goal for their business. And 81% of accountabilities are not held accountable for regular progress. And maybe that's one, Ed, you can comment on. You've been in so many organizations, but employees doing their job, but they haven't been told from the top down. They haven't been led to understanding what they should be doing and why. Care to comment on that? And
Yeah, a lot of times in the accountability issue, nobody sets out a matrix of key items that should be measured to make sure that people are accountable. And a lot of times they say, well, just take care of the problem. Well, that's not a directive. That's an objective. Take care of it. But what's the timeline and what's going to be necessary to accomplish that objective? You don't set any of those parameters down. So consequently, any time in the future is reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll get to it next week.
Exactly.
And you know what that bubbles up into is the rolling 5-year goal. Well, in 5 years, and you come back 2 years later and you're still hearing, well, in 5 years, and it just rolls forward because we're so busy doing our jobs that we forget the context and the objective of doing our job. So, accountability plays a huge role. And when we talk about employees productive and loyal, as we did in Dimension 1, accountability is the name of the game. Remember we talked about a defined role, a number that connotes success, a KPI for that role, and then being held accountable to that goal. And the problem is leadership teams do a lot of talking, they do a lot of promising, they often don't deliver, and not because they're bad, but they simply don't. They have not worked with you yet, and they don't yet know. They don't know what they don't know, right? So they haven't really focused on how to create accountability to promises, and the solution is to start educating the senior leadership team by running the senior leadership team alignment. And so much comes out of, you've done the alignment workshops, Ed.
Yeah,
Any comments there?
Yeah, the big thing that we find in alignment is that the individuals believe that they're all working towards a common goal until you ask them to do and answer specific questions. And then you find out that they each perceive the common goal differently. And it's the subjective interpretation creates disalignment of the leadership team.
Yes, that's right. Which leads to frustration, which can lead to bad behavior, toxic behavior, good behavior that is like very collegial, but doesn't move the ball forward. So there are really three cures to three things you should either confirm are in place, and if not, help the client to install. Transparency, and that starts with your very first conversation with the CEO. Are they willing to be transparent? Are they willing to be vulnerable? Are they willing to share? It's hard to have an effective senior leadership team where everyone is aligned with and accountable to the goal if the CEO, the business owner, is not willing to be transparent about these things. Collaborative planning. Think about how different it is if you were asked to do something that you were involved in planning and where your inputs were at least heard, versus someone putting a directive on your desk and saying, hey, even in a friendly way, why don't you get this done? A very, very different experience. And by the way, a plan that is created collaboratively is in all likelihood more likely to reflect reality and the realities of execution. And then with collaborative planning, you should also be always thinking about accountable execution, KPIs, keeping score, getting on tempo, getting into a rhythm, and maintaining that rhythm, that tempo. And it doesn't have to be breakneck. In fact, I would argue that a measured pace is the way to go. So when everyone agrees with the vision and mission, everyone can pull towards it. And you'll remember when we talked about employees in Dimension 1 and Dimension 2, we talked about using the vision, mission, and guiding principles to make sure that we have the right people in the business. And we talked a little bit about how people who don't meet those guiding principles, will often vote themselves off the aisle. They'll say, you know what, this isn't the job for me. I don't agree for whatever reason. When we connect transparency and planning with accountability to results, to defined OKRs and KPIs, it is like magic. And I can speak, firsthand. I have personally turned businesses around with this simple premise. You connect transparency and collaborative planning to defined objectives and key results, KPIs that measure our success, and it is magic. People want to do well, and so magic happens. Ed, by the way, I know you'll jump in with comments. Ed and I have been teaching together for well over a decade. So,
yeah, I think one of the things that I would jump in and say on the accountability factor there is that all too often people are afraid to put accountability down because they know some people can't reach an objective based on seeing a timeline on it. On the other hand, that holds up the rest of the organization if one person is not able to keep up the pace. And that means someone else is going to either have to support them or will have to move the accountability responsibility to someone else who is able to deal with the timeline.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And what we're going to see, and we talked about this a bit in effective senior leadership, you may have, well, I know that that's not my job, but Frank never gets it done, and it's easy for me, so I do it. Well, suddenly we're playing outside of the fence, and there's only so much time in a day. So if you're doing part of someone else's job, does that reflect in part of your own accountabilities that aren't being met, or could you be excelling with the time that you're having to take to do someone else's job? And often it's simply a matter of Frank might say, well, I don't do it because I thought you loved doing it and it's not that important to me. I'm happy to do it. Those types of things, but they need to be talked through. They need to be workshopped. So let's take a second, drill down on transparency. Transparency is like a magic bullet. When you start being open with people, when you get out, I talk about it in my book. A culture of little secrets is a business that does not have a strategic culture. A culture of little secrets and fiefdoms and side conversations. When you start getting baloney parroted around in the weekly meeting, believe me, I've lived in this business. And things, it just slows down. So, one, transparency. We need to have clarity about goals, clarity about the business's intent. In 5 years, this will be a very different place because we'll have doubled our revenue and we will have increased our employee base by 60%, et cetera. Very clear goal. By the way, by enunciating that, you're setting future expectations and helping people decide if they want to be there. Help them decide that they want to be there and that they're excited about the future. 2, performance transparency. How is the business doing? You don't have to get, guys, top line revenue, margin percentages. I'm not trying to you don't have to blur, but you can share some big metrics. And Ed, I'd love to hear I know you have firsthand knowledge of this. By the way, when you share these metrics and you put them up on a board, you put them up on the wall, on a banner, on a Jumbotron in the hallway, people get it and they get excited. You want to talk about performance transparency, who's winning, who's losing? I'm thinking about your son's company.
Yeah, one of the big things that I've seen in several companies, they have goals for each individual, but then they have the status against their objectives collectively for the whole week, and they post them all on the internet. Since my son's got a recruiting company, and 80% of his employees work from home every day. And they are exceeding and beating goals because they see how other people are performing, and it's in how many outgoing calls, how many incoming calls, who's getting placements out there to go and do interviews, etc. In other words, they've got KPIs and they account and give value to each of the KPIs so that you're both, no matter what you're doing, you can get some points and it amounts up to some value opportunities, because then they give awards each month for the people as they're performing, and you have to hit a certain minimum level to qualify to have your name in the drawing.
Absolutely. And I love that. I love that. I've got looking into your son's business. I've been in there a few times. It has they're a very sales driven organization, and you can feel it when you walk through the door. They have a giant gong. Remember, like rock bands had in the 80s, they have a giant gong. When a deal is closed, the salesperson goes up and whacks the gong. It's almost like it's in an alcove. It's almost like a shrine to success, down to little things. And I'm getting into culture, a can-do, will-do culture with everyone, where everyone understands how everyone else is doing. They have dress down Fridays, right? Casual Fridays. Then you have to earn that right every week to dress casually, right?
Yeah, that's one of the nice things about having some kind of incentive like that. Some people have a dress down Fridays. Other people have, if you've hit all of your objectives for 5 days and 4 days, well, then you get a half a day on Friday.
Nice.
So people pick different types of rewards depending on the nature of your workforce. And not all workforces can accommodate that.
And everyone knows. I mean, it's just the buzz. And that brings us to collaborative accountability. And I always try to use those two words together. How do we foster team-wide responsibility for outcomes? And remember, I talked about this in People Productive and Loyal. I need to do 7 a day. My team needs to do 35 a day. But how does this build up to corporate success? And how do we reward team-wide responsibility for outcomes? Responsibility. And by the way, part of this is celebrating failure, right? So accountability for success and taking accountability for failure. And importantly, those after action reports. We tried X, it resulted in Y, which was not what we wanted. Here's what we've learned and how we're going to apply it going forward. Let's make that a habit. The SEALs get used a lot as an example, but the SEALs do exactly that. They sand table everything beforehand. They do a practice run through. They perform the mission, the training mission typically, or the field mission, and then they sit down immediately and debrief and do after action work. So collaborative accountability is our third ingredient. So how does this all roll into creating a strategic growth project plan? Let me take a sec to talk about that term, strategic. So this is a growth project. And I want to make sure we continue to focus on the fact that this is strategic, right? So it is being done as a matter of strategy, not simply muscle memory. And it is a project for which we have a plan. There's a reason there are 4 words, when often others will use 2, maybe 3 words to describe it. It's strategic growth. That is the execution by projects of a plan. All right, so we won't whip that horse too hard. How do we create a plan? How do we craft a plan that is, the objective is to create a plan that has a high likelihood of being successfully executed. And I'm sorry, I just noticed that the AI generated, a lot of AI generated images, ladies and gentlemen, here, and sometimes AI is nonsensical. So very pretty picture. I'm sorry for the distraction. All right. So our plan has to integrate the vision and mission. Now, we may state them at the top, but we really need to, in our thinking, in our planning, we are going to always be focused on the vision and mission. Does this help us execute our mission to move to the vision? Goal definition, strategic intent. And we've talked about the fact that intent is far more meaningful than a mere goal. Clearly defining where the company must go. And as I hope you're beginning to appreciate, by clearly defining where the company must go at the very beginning of our work with the client, we are qualifying that client. We are educating the client about, okay, we are generating $12 million a year this year. We need to get to $30 million top line with 20% margin, right? That is Diane's intent for Ridge. She has a corollary intent, which is to help her son evolve into the senior leadership position, which isn't going to happen overnight. So clearly defining where the company must go. And you'll notice I just teased it out. That intent can have more than could, should, Ed, let's talk about that. Could, should have more than simply a dollar sign. And when we have the strategic intent defined, we need to talk about the implications of not achieving that intent. That's not intended. That's more of an emotional performance enhancer for our client, the CEO. But those implications are typically reflected in the organization as well. And there's the implied negative. And if we hit this goal, you will all benefit by X, Y, and Z, which with the implied. And if we don't, you won't. I'm also a big believer. It depends on the situation in making sure that compensation is drawn up in a way that I do this with my sons. You either hit the goal, or you didn't. There is no graduated reward for missing the goal. And I know that sounds tough. That's pretty nuanced depending on the situation. But anyhow, there are implications of not hitting the goal. And then we need to make sure that we have, even if they're challenging, achievable deadlines and the resources that are available for execution. And all of this needs to be talked through. It's no sense in saying we're going to storm the beach if you don't have landing craft. It's no sense in saying we're going to storm the beach and then move inland if you don't have supporting assets, et cetera. So timelines and resources, they've got to be talked about. And
yeah, I think that's one of the things that many companies fail to do, and that is they all have the objectives and they imply that you're going to have to get these rewards. But then you find out they're missing something. They don't have the sales materials that they should have in order to sell the product. Or if you're in the service delivery side, they may not have the capabilities and they need additional help in order to accomplish that.
Heck yes. And resources are financial, our people, our processes, maybe outside support. There's so much that can be brought to bear. We need to think about this all very carefully in advance. And as we execute the plan, we're talking about an executable plan and some of the ingredients that go into making a plan executable. Let's shift our attention. Remember, we talked about strategic culture in dimension 2. So the impact of culture on successful execution is proven. It's well established. The old saw, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We visited that when we discussed dimension 2. And there are some hallmarks of a strategic culture. So one is a culture of collaborative accountability that should permeate throughout the business. Okay. So not only is the senior leadership meeting weekly, each senior leader is meeting with their team. Those teams are pushing down till we get down to the shop floor and the daily huddles of working groups and teams. Everyone collaborating to keep the business on tempo and keep the business moving forward, so that we create a culture that predicts bottlenecks. It doesn't wait to react to bottlenecks. It is able to predict bottlenecks and address them before they slow down forward progress, right? Regular meetings, barrier breakings, discuss and neutralize obstacles to execution. And, if in doubt, if you see something, say something. If in doubt, bring it up. It doesn't cost much to get something on the table. And if we can be dismissed, we have data that indicates that is not an issue, not that'll never happen. Believe me, it'll happen. And make it an organization-wide practice, transparency and accountability at all levels. And as we talk through strategic intent, strategic capacity, having a plan, executing that plan, driving it down, just imagine how likely you are by starting to educate your client about the power of these concepts, how likely you are to deliver the client win. That's the name of the game, right? Deliver the client win as you move them forward. And it does not matter whether you're an exit planning wealth advisor and you educate the client at the front end and say, here, you take it from here and I'm going to check in periodically, or your ed who stays with the organization over the long term, co-drives the business with the CEO. We all need to be focused on this executable plan perspective. Anything to add there, Ed?
One thing I would reinforce, and that is the predictability of unpredictability. There's definitely going to be probabilities that certain adverse things will occur during the course of a year. And so what you have to have is your secondary plan. If that happens, then I do X. If it doesn't happen, then I do Y. It's just to be aware of the risk of having something not occurring the way you'd like it to occur. You just have to be prepared to what are the alternatives that I can implement.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny how this can foster innovation, a new way of thinking, a willingness to try new approaches, and getting away from, that's how we do it. If how we do it isn't delivering results, then we need to change. There's often a misunderstanding about what accountability means within a team. And accountability does not mean blame, right? It means moving the business forward and understanding if goals aren't reached, why they weren't reached, teaching the team, helping them. We're going to talk about in a future class, we're going to talk about facilitation techniques, helping the team learn to discuss openly and candidly the reasons behind missing results or KPIs. KPIs in a weekly meeting, results on a monthly or quarterly basis. Why didn't we? And taking responsibility for it. How do we foster innovation, a learning mindset? And so there are three guiding principles, if you will. This is not about blame, right? There's no good news or bad news, only data. We need to openly discuss, and this can be hard, and we often have to retrain teams, and sometimes there are individuals or there are one or two people on a team who aren't capable of doing this. It's just not in their personality. That will come to the surface and often resolves itself, or prompts a resolution. And also fosters a learning mindset, right? Failures are opportunities to learn. Great to avoid failures. That's impossible. A failure is an opportunity to learn and improve. We can only learn and improve if we're keeping data, if we're keeping measurements, right? If we fail and we don't clearly understand why, that's a different animal altogether.
I think that's one thing I always suggest to the owners, and that is when they miss goals or they miss an objective at a certain point in time, write down what occurred and how the business operated because of that occurrence, so that they have a foundation to have informed discussion afterwards on how might they have addressed it a little differently. It makes it a lot clearer for everybody then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And accountability, it sounds, people forget the power of a simple checklist. And how do we support execution with a checklist? And checklists at every level of the organization, the simple, old-fashioned, use a pencil or pen checklist is incredibly powerful. And in many businesses, that checklist can be is a game changer. We built I was in a hiatus from doing this type of work, and I helped my partner build a medical practice. And that was a checklist game. And they were laminated, and they were in key locations. And it's very, if you went into an exam room, for example, and something wasn't right, you could simply you could ask the nurse in a positive way, right? This is not about blame. Hey, I noticed X. It's on the checklist. Why wasn't it done? I forgot, whatever the reason is, but the checklist meant that we took we built $1 million business very, very quickly. And I will credit checklists with getting that business there. And this is true across industries. I mean, you're an account, you started your life in accounting, Ed. I mean, how do checklists play out there?
I mean, every aspect of a balance sheet, you had a checklist of anything from 15 to 30 questions that you had to respond to positively or negatively that was present at the given audit engagement. And I think the biggest problem people have now with checklists is because we make them electronic based. People don't take the time to read the item. They just check off that it was done without understanding what the question was really, what they were supposed to do.
Yeah, the context. Sure.
Exactly.
Sure. And checklists should not be constricting, right? And that's, we talked about, intent and crafting intent. A checklist, checklist is obviously, as the name implies, but they should be carefully prepared in a way that allows for execution in line with intent. But checklists for a lot of job functions or for a lot of tasks are wonderful. They're simple. Okay. Checklists that define individual responsibilities, accountabilities. If we have a stack of checklists, how do they link, right? Do all of the tasks that we've enumerated build up to moving the business forward? You can't expect people to remember. And let's say we're dealing with, we're dealing with the first dimension. There are an average of 5 key results, and then underneath for each of those 8, so we have 40 key results, and under each key result, to execute against that key result, there is a stack of tasks that's in execute guidance in the software. There is a stack of tasks that are going to play out in something like 90, things that have to get done either, simultaneously or in sequence. All of this, by writing it down and creating good, crisp communications of intent and timing, without getting into micromanaging, right, is the key to linking personal tasks with achieving company objectives, and always tracking progress, right? Target scores. We can have target scores in each of the growth driving objectives. We'll have KPIs for how we're doing, what we're doing, etc. That measures advancement, and they all stack up to changing the value of the business from 18 million to 51 million.
I think that the progress tracking is so critical, because you got to let if everybody has it in an open information, each department or each function within the company is performing whatever they're supposed to be working on at that point in time on the overall corporate objective. And if you have everybody seeing what the other departments are doing, they can all see who's hurting and who's struggling, or who's doing extremely well, and what's happening to create that failure or success. And it may be anything from a shortage of people to a dynamic opportunity of somebody taking off and doing something above and beyond what's expected.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And yes, that's exactly right. It's going to go down a different rabbit hole. Okay, so checklists. Now, when we have checklists, what other straightforward ways? So we're trying to help people. We can't beat them over the head with incredibly complicated tools, etc. Let's remember the power of checklists, right? Remember the power of a simple worksheet, the power of a simple Gantt chart. Gantt charts are fantastic. They are a fantastic way to communicate flow, right? They are a fantastic way to workshop the planning process. If we do this and then the other, what does executing our first goal need to be true before we can do it? And what can we make true? What options does that create for us? And imagine doing that in a simple Gantt chart. You can do it on a whiteboard, do it on an Excel spreadsheet. You can do it in Monday or Asana. You can do it in 90.io. The simple Gantt chart is a very powerful, there's a reason it's so widely used, right? So use a Gantt to develop a blueprint.
Yeah, I think it's often helpful because when people see stages along the way, they recognize that there's not one thing that has to be accomplished. They all lead to subsequent events that have to be met after you've accomplished the first and the second and the third.
And it helps communicate implication. And if we don't do the first and the second and the third, we're not going to be able to do the fourth. And it brings it into reality, right? So in the growth drive methodology, in our process, we cascade. It's called a waterfall, and we do sequential objectives. So we're going to need to create an effective senior leadership team so that we can then work on people productive and loyal, and they flow into each other. That's why it's called a waterfall. It again comes out of software development, but we have a waterfall of linked OKRs that build on each other, that build strength. And we talk all the time about creating initial wins. This is about building momentum, creating confidence, leveraging that confidence to get on a tempo, maintain the tempo. Over time, increase that tempo. Suddenly, we're working on 2 strategic initiatives at the same time. We're maximizing margins while improving recurring revenue, if you will, and building momentum. And Gantt charts are great at showing progress. So every time you put it up, it's an implied. Remember, this is where we started. This was our journey, and here's where we are today. And people can see their work building into something bigger. So, state the obvious. In a Gantt chart, we're going to have tasks on our y-axis and time on our just to demonstrate for you. But this is, imagine, you could use this to lead a simple workshop. The other concept in an executable growth plan is that we're starting to say, oh, we don't have to finish one sprint 100% before we can start preparing for the next one. Yeah. Let's get to the elements of a Gantt chart. Okay, so some background. The strategic growth project plan is divided into objectives, OKRs, right? The objectives build on each other. They are sequential. And the sequence is a waterfall. When we just discussed this, right? There's a defined success metric before we move to the next one. By making sure we've hit the KPI, or that we can prove the key result has been attained before we move forward, we ensure that we're building strength in the plan. Remember, the first dimension, for example, is the launch pad for growth, and the dimension to which we always look back and say, let's make sure we remain strong. Objectives are what is called in the vernacular rocks, right? This is the one thing we are doing right now. Everything else is not a rock, is not our core focus. And we need to allow enough time to reach each objective, especially at the beginning of the engagement. You're talking about transforming how a team does what they do. And as you're transforming it, you're asking for increased performance. So we need to, especially at first, take our time. We need to have the institutional patience for this to solidify. That patience isn't limitless, right? We need to move forward, but we need to at first make sure that people are in the saddle, understanding how this works and learning to work in a new way. This is change management, right? Now, once we develop good strength and a senior leadership team that has some bench depth, then you might try running waterfalls in tandem, as long as it's been carefully thought out. Again, success is the name of the game. Success at tempo.
That time frame of 1 to 3 months, I can't emphasize enough. Often management says they're going to get it done in 30 days. The reality is I have never seen them reach the 30-day timeline. It always takes 2 months to 2.5 months to get the first one done, because somebody isn't doing one part of it. And until it all gets together, it's like I've got 5 pieces to the puzzle, but I only have 3 pieces right now. I need 2 more to complete it. And I need time to get there, because those teams have to maybe do more, or they're hurting because they have a lack of people.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it could be that we need to coach up people on the senior leadership team. That's simply a fact. And Ed, you run into this. So they think they can do project X, and you say, fine, try. Right. And and you come back after 30 days, and how do you handle it?
Yeah. Most of the time I tell the business owner, and when we lay out a plan like this and they're going to get it done in 30 days, I said, how about if I come back in 30 days and just evaluate how well you've accomplished it? And 99% of the time, nothing got done. We come back and they say, well, we didn't have enough time. I mean, don't you realize we're so busy? We already have a job. Now you're asking me to do something extra. And so they're all defending themselves, yet they all know they needed to do something.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And by coming back after 30 days, like, okay, guys, well, how can we help? And that help may be, well, we need to bring in a fractional CMO to help, whatever that help may be. How do we coach people up? How do we help them how do we keep the project moving forward and do it in a way that our client understands if there are additional investments required, why that's the case. So waterfalls are very, very powerful. To build a successful, we're talking about building an executable strategic growth project plan. Stakeholder requirements are gathered at the beginning of a sequential project plan. Requirements are understood before we get into planning. And that can take a lot of thinking. Now, the methodology and process and execute guidance provides a lot of insights for you as you're doing this work, ladies and gentlemen. But this is the great way to do it. And Gantt charts are, again, I'll reiterate, a preferred tool for working through this because you can map subtasks, especially if you're using a technology. And it's great to build them in Excel. You do not need to teach yourself a new technology. If you're comfortable in Excel, do it in Excel, okay? You can convert it to a CSV and upload it into most of the systems. These are built into a 90, or the framework for this is built into 90.io for you already. Up to you if you choose to use it. So, the execution flow, we're going to talk about this a little bit. The execution flow as it's laid out in the software is in the methodology is straightforward. We're going to start with, leadership, people, financial processes, revenue stability, et cetera. That's great. That does not mean that the organization has the time, the treasure, or the talent to get it done in this order. And that is something that needs to be understood before you create the plan. If not, it will not be executable. And you could say, well, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And the answer could be, well, that's great, but our CFO is on sabbatical, or our CMO is on paternity leave. And, that is going to throw a wrinkle, or X just quit, or Y, whatever you need to make sure that the assets are in place. That's why, we understand our resources at the beginning, and we need to understand the capabilities. And there are different exercises we can do with the senior leadership team, a little outside of the scope of this course, but there are different ways to make sure that we are prioritizing, and you always can use the Eisenhower squares, right? Sit down and do some thinking, create an Eisenhower square, and figure out what is going to, if we're trying to increase, if we're going to try to increase profitability, for example, and that's our x-axis, impact on profitability, and then ability to execute is on our y-axis. You can start putting together a very clear picture in your mind, and importantly in your client's mind, of what can be done and when, and what other resources might need to be brought to the table. So you've created your Gantt. Now, we talked about the fact that we have each senior leader is accountable for one at any given time, or one of each of the growth driving objectives is a senior leader is accountable for each of the objectives. Easy for me to say. So that you can look into the leadership module inside Clarity to do this, but you need to assign one person to be accountable for each sprint in your Gantt chart. Very, very important. The buck needs to stop with someone. If it doesn't stop with someone, it doesn't stop with anyone. Okay. So as you build your Gantt, you need to, you have a perfect world scenario. Then you need to have here's the reality on the ground. Here's what my client actually can do. And that needs to be discussed, because what we're talking about is potentially gaps in their expertise, and literally in their ability to do this. We need to understand that up front. Ed, any thoughts?
I think that's the biggest thing there, is that single accountability. Someone's going to have to manage each one of these functions and make sure that it's getting done. And I think that's the key, is that your senior leadership has got to be on top of the management of the project. Absolutely. You as a consultant cannot be the manager. The person on the job in the company has to be running the project, and you're advising and guiding. You're not doing.
Yeah, and we will talk about this, but you are not doing. Thank you, Ed. And I did not prompt you to say that, but I will buy you a glass of wine next time we're together. You are not doing. You are the peer with the CEO, and if you get involved, think it through. Play the hand forward. If you get involved in doing, just imagine the implications. None of them are good for the long term. So this went out when we're assigning accountability across our waterfall. We have to keep something in mind. The whirlwind, right? The whirlwind. Who coined that term? Not us. Someone else's IP. The senior team is a resource with time constraints. They have a day job. They already have a job. They're already working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. So when we're designing an executable plan, we need to spread accountabilities, right? We can't drink the whole ocean. So we need to spread it around the team. And if we're going to have the CFO keenly focused over a 1, 2, 3 month period, that next period, let's give them a reprieve. Let's do something else. Put someone else in the spotlight, right? Distribute them over time. And in your analysis, you're going to be able to understand how relatively hard these are. Now, it's relative, because for one organization, moving their effective senior leadership from 52 to 70 might be easy. You might have just the right mix. For another organization, it could be painfully hard. So, all your analysis. Now, what I want to, again, if you look all the way back from your strategic intent, your growth conversation, CEO clarity, the senior leadership team alignment, exercise involving the senior leadership team and the deep analysis. Now, imagine that your deep understanding now of the people with whom you're dealing and the organization that they're running, how that informs this decision. All of this builds. The vision is to help $1 trillion increase strategic capacity in the 3 dimensions of business growth. If we do this all right, we are going to execute against that vision. So I'm on my soapbox. Now, the get elements build up to generate an ROI for your client. So inside the tool, you will always be able to track the ROI for getting the job done. And if you can show your client that the work they've done has increased their latent value by $2 million, they're not ready to monetize yet, but increase their latent value by, for example, $2 million, you are proving the value that their association with you and their investment they're making of time and treasure in this project is having. Critically, maybe not critically important, but very important and valuable. Okay?
Yeah, I think what you see is the impact if you have a project defined and then you have a process to implement it, and then you look at the results. So we defined it, we've measured it, and then we give them a feedback on where it is. And I think that's often where many companies don't want to get to the end. They stop halfway through and say, "Oh yeah, we're doing okay," and they stop working any harder.
Absolutely. And there are going to be times when they want to give up, and there are going to be times when your client says, "This is frustrating, I'm done." And that is going to happen. You never know your client can disappear from one place and reappear in a completely other headspace, intent overnight. We need to be ready for that. The nice thing about having a defined intent and defined implications, it allows you to ask some questions like, well, this is where you said you wanted to go. Has that changed? Okay. Gantt charts always have start and end dates. If it doesn't have a date on it, it's not going to get done. And so the timeline stacks up to having success points, to having sprints that meet objectives, that cascade in a waterfall, that move the business forward and give us a lot to plan for. You can also be very efficient. I mentioned it a minute ago. You can tell the sales team, "Hey guys, we are going to change the great work you're doing into a process that is performed by all. Why don't you start writing down, you're the top most productive salespeople, how you do what you do. And then we're going to turn that into a process. We're going to do training. You'll be able to lead it, all the things." But they can be doing that and preparing for implementing a sales process long before it is actually their sprint. So that's bringing time efficiency to bear and making sure that we don't start from a dead stop as we start sprints. So how do we decide where to start? One is knowing the CEO's goal, and then we get the head on straight, and then we get the people productive and loyal, and then we make sure we've cemented our recurring revenues, et cetera. Okay. There is an implied process and order of battle in the methodology, but this is not a perfect world, okay? It is not a perfect world. So remember, figure out what you actually have to work with and how you might need to improve it, and work with your client on that. Okay. So, in these slides, you have some discussion on execution flow. And things we need to dig into. So, for example, margins can take a long time to improve. Now you can't snap your fingers. Sales process may be easier.
Well, margins are always a challenge because many companies don't realize where they stand compared to the industry.
Yeah. And we talk about, I discussed it in the class on Dimension 1, customer satisfaction. I'm going to take a sec to stay on there. The power of getting customer sat data is so important. It's so vital. We can get bad news. We can identify bottlenecks to making our customers happy, right? Happy customers is our brand. Okay. Our culture creates happy customers. That is our brand. We can lay the groundwork for this early in the project and start doing some things that are more sophisticated. High customer satisfaction will feed, if we're doing a 3-year plan, if we're creating a 3-year plan to maximize transferable value, then customer satisfaction, getting this right in the first year, feeds the second year, feeds growth, makes it easier to grow the business. Okay. So as you start looking forward into the second year, strategic culture, et cetera, what we're going to learn from customer satisfaction, that crazy 8, as I call it, in year 1 is very, very important. So these, you can see how these build, guys. These build. Mentioned a few waterfall management software. 90.io is what we recommend. We have a complete integration in there, but there's some other great software. If you're used to using them, don't reinvent the wheel. Monday.com, Asana, Teamwork, Reich, Keep. They're at the Excel spreadsheet, okay, a whiteboard. So here's a growth drive project in Monday.com, for example. And, it allows you to take a bunch of different looks at the same data and build those waterfalls. So as we're doing this work, we have to define success, okay? So I'm going to keep it high level. We have scores. The system, the Clarity software generates a score. Your initial target should be to get 70s in each of the 8 growth driving objectives. This is a process of continuous improvement. So when you build momentum, you may see that those scores as you go back and revisit with the client and adjust upwards and suggest things like, well, if you did X, we might move from partly true to best practice. Teams will get involved in continuous improvement. It becomes part of their worldview, of how they do their job, of the Acme way. The other thing about scores is it provides a holistic view by dimension and for the whole organization. Okay. So then that holistic view, understanding the sum of the parts is fantastic. So, all right. How do we define effective OKRs or effective KPIs? Time bound, client paced, right? How can the client, can we keep the client on a tempo and then increase that tempo slowly but surely, dial up the rheostat? Accountability, maintain adherence to the schedule. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, the weekly meeting, using a tool like the Business Flow Scorecard. If you want to transform a business, if you can do no other one thing, keeping score and discussing it weekly is the most powerful thing you can help them do. All right. If it's all you do, you're limiting success, but you're already going to be delivering a lot of change. And we need to make sure that people remain committed throughout the deployment. And that can also change. We're dealing with humans, right? We are messy animals. So I'm tired of doing this stuff. Well, that's not an attitude that's going to really help the team. And if somebody voices that enough and nobody catches it and works on it, suddenly your collaboratively accountable team is off back to their old ways. Ed, talk for a moment about people going back to their bad habits.
I think one of the things that you see most often is that people are very comfortable doing it the old way, and they're not anxious to adapt to the new way of measure and accountability, and then keeping other people in the loop on where they stand and how well they're doing reaching their goal. And suddenly they get frustrated and stop working completely. And that's where the collaboration on the team needs to be able to pick the person up who's falling down because they lack the drive, or their frustration because it requires more effort than they anticipated they would have to put out for the project.
Absolutely. And the naysayers, the pocket veto, things that I've personally lived through, are caustic. They're highly corrosive to momentum. They're corrosive to success, and need to be dealt with very judiciously and very carefully. That's all I'll say about that at this time. All right. Now, our differentiator as a growth driver, right? Your differentiator, getting the C3D, is that you're going to link achieving these OKRs. You can define the OKRs. They're all super intuitive for your client. And you're saying, okay, well, when we achieve these things, when we make these things more true than they are today, the value of your business is going to increase. And I can tell you, I assure you, I promise you, as you increase strength, especially in dimension 1 and leaning into dimension 2, you're going to see revenues pop. It cannot be helped. It is perforce. So, as you start to build, you're going to start building momentum and have a positive feedback loop, ladies and gentlemen. And it is, it is insanely powerful, which is why getting it right out of the gate and crawl, walk, run. And pretty soon you'll see this business running and doing things easily, little rabbit ears, that it may have thought impossible previously. And the impact on the overall business, its value, its place in the market, and the internal culture. You're talking about transforming the culture. But if you show up on day one and say, "Hi, my name's George, and I'm going to change your culture," people don't get what you mean. They don't understand, right? So you're going to do it surreptitiously. You're going to just teach them all how to do a better job. Again, through these relatively straightforward objectives, key results, KPIs, individual worth, dignity of the job, making sure we're paying people in line with the industry, making sure we're delighting our clients, customers, etc. Massive impact. Massive impact. So, okay. What I've just discussed is the concept of embedding OKR management, OKR accountability into the business, right? Into the very culture of the business, into its DNA. And if our objective is to leave an indelible positive mark on the business, these are ways in which we can leave an indelible positive mark. Even if they decide not to move forward, you can feel good and have a referenceable customer because you will have left the business in a better place than you found it. And this is a surefire way to leave it in a better place than you found it. Okay? We've talked about sprints, just waterfall. Each sprint is focused. It targets a specific OKR. If there are sub-projects underneath, we'll identify them and execute them before we move on. We establish goals, right? These are time-bound performance metrics that are sequentially that build on each other. And we're going to use a Gantt or a similar tool to visualize the work to be done and the fact that we are building strength. We are growing from strength to strength to strength.
I think the balancing strategic work with the day job is very critical because there has to be a priority in the mindset of every one of your key managers that they've got to be focused on these objectives that were set and watch how well they're working and moving on those objectives. And I think the problem they have is that sometimes fires happen within their job each day that distract them from being able to do it. And there has to be a reminder that kicks back either a fellow member of the management team or an action on their own behalf that reminds them to get back and make sure they focus on the strategic work that they were supposed to work on that day.
Absolutely. Heck yes. And ladies and gentlemen, if you think back to when we discussed creating effective senior leadership, so Ed, thank you. Fabulous point. Effective senior leadership. And we talked about succession and that there's succession for the short term, the medium term, and the long term permanent. Now, imagine if you have this succession plan in place. It's like, listen, Barbara, I need you to cover for me on X accountability because I need my time to make sure that we keep this strategic initiative moving forward. Collaborative accountability, covering for each other, teamwork. I'm not making this up. I mean, that works, right, folks? That works. And is discussed. And if you're discussing it every Monday, if Barbara is overwhelmed, we have an opportunity to dynamically address it. Okay. So we have day jobs. We know how to cover. We have defined how to cover for each other in case of temporary or more permanent. Okay. This stuff plays out. Again, there's a reason that we go through these exercises early in the process with our client. Analyze, design, execute. We always track progress, and you always adjust. The reason that tracking progress is analyze, adjusting is design, and then we execute. And you will your client will create bottlenecks as they do this work. They are going to break things that were fine. I used the simple example. Marketing pours leads into sales. Sales has a great process. They're generating more orders. Operations starts drowning in orders, unable to deliver on time and to spec. Customer satisfaction, suffers. You get a few negative reviews online, etc. So we always analyze, design, execute, and you keep the cycle going. You have to track the details and stay flexible, and focus on progress and celebrate progress. Ed, your son's company, so many companies we deal with, when you celebrate progress in little ways, right? A simple attaboy goes so far as simply calling out, and you'll see it in the execution leadership system. You've seen it in my book. In the daily huddle, the weekly meetings, talking about success, what's good, what's going on that's happy, from personal milestones, having a baby, getting married, going on a fabulous vacation, to, hey, George was supposed to do 8 and he did 16 last week. Don't know how he did it, George. You're a hero. So focus on progress.
And it doesn't matter what department you're in the company and when you're doing that either. It's nice if each department has a little recognition of people who have done outstanding achievements the past week or did something unique that nobody else ever thought about.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And kids, we have some data on this. You start doing this. We have a proven track record. There are so many nuances here that I never discuss this, or I rarely discuss this publicly. But increasing annual revenue by 22% when there's a commitment to execution. So when we craft the right plan that is executable, we have the data, and businesses pop 22%. Imagine delivering 22% growth year after year for your client. Now, there are so many factors that go into that, and I tend not to talk about it gratuitously. But here inside C3D, this is what happens when we install these powerful concepts in our clients. Okay, trying to just sleep on that tonight. 22% annual revenue increase, proven. The data is in. Now the problem is there are so many things out there in the world that need to be done right. And it starts with qualifying the client being willing to be transparent, et cetera. But when this all lines up, you can deliver dramatic results, sustained dramatic results. Okay, guys, creating a plan that is executable is the name of the game. Transparency and collaborative accountability, keeping score, and understanding how to line it out in a way that is not overwhelming, that is achievable. Even if audacious, it is achievable for your client, and continuously communicating in ways that are easy to understand, discuss, and adjust. This is how we deliver client wins. Ed, man, thank you. Anything you'd like to add in closing?
I think the one thing that you have to make sure is that you constantly get tuned into the CEO and make sure that they see what's being accomplished by the individual teams and how hard they have to put out the extra effort beyond what they're doing as an ordinary job. I think frequently the CEO sees the overall and says, oh, wow, we're doing fantastic. Well, but individuals have accomplished it he didn't or she didn't. So you got to make sure that we help the organization to recognize the individuals who are contributing and making the whole process come through successfully.
Yeah, and the last line on this recap is, and a well-structured meeting rhythm, and that class is coming right up. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you in the next class.
Have a great day.